beginning is a very delicate time. Know then that it is the year 10,191. The known universe is ruled by the Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV, my father. In this time, the most precious substance in the universe is the spice melange. The spice extends life. The spice expands consciousness.
Dune is an epic science fiction film released by Universal Pictures on December 14, 1984. Based on the Frank Herbert novel of the same name, the film was written by David Lynch, who also directed the film. The film stars Kyle MacLachlan, Francesca Annis, Jose Ferrer, Kenneth McMillan, Max von Sydow, Patrick Stewart, and Jürgen Prochnow. With many being reminded of the massive impact of the literary classic Dune, courtesy of the recent 2021 adaptation, it is worth delving into just how much toil and difficulty getting the novel on screen was since its release in 1965. There have been near countless attempts to adapt the literary source material, many of which would fail to ever see the light of day. But the most prominent example to succeed in finding the silver screen was the 1984 adaptation directed by David Lynch, a landmark director for both the innovative and the bizarre. So with a pedigree like that for a novel adaptation like this, it warrants the question, what can we expect from this take on a novel? What does it do right? And where does it go wrong? In this review, we take a step back in time and take a closer look at the vision of the future that this film has to share. Just as a warning, there will be major spoilers ahead. If you wish to see this movie for yourself without knowing anything beforehand, please click off the video now. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The story begins in the year 10,191, where the most important planet in the known universe, Arrakis, is hotly contested by the houses of the Empire, due to it being the only location in the known universe to have the spice melange, a substance that extends human longevity and expands consciousness. It is also a critical component in allowing for successful interstellar travel. The Emperor of the known universe, Shaddam IV, is visited by the Spacing Guild, the organization that holds a monopoly on interstellar travel, demanding to know the reason behind the Emperor's decision to remove the Harkonnens from Arrakis. The Emperor reveals to the Guild that he replaced the Harkonnens with their rivals, the Atreides, as a means of wiping out the Atreides. Their political influence and use of sonic weirding technology poses a threat to the Emperor and his rule. As such, he has schemed with the Harkonnens, providing his own elite Sardaukar troops and organizing an attack, scheduled to take place once the Atreides have relocated to Arrakis. While the Spacing Guild approves of his plot, they levy an additional demand. The heir to the House Atreides, Paul, must be killed in the attack. Curious as to why the young Paul is of such a threat to the Guild, the Emperor's truthsayer, Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother Mohiam, goes to the Atreides' homeworld of Caladan to visit the boy. Paul Atreides, as heir to the House Atreides, is trained by House Aides Gurney Halleck, Thufir Hawat, and Dr. Wellington Yue in preparation for him to claim dukeship of the House Atreides from his father. Unbeknownst to many, however, Paul is also trained by his mother, Lady Jessica, a sister of the Bene Gesserit, in the witching ways, despite the fact that the Bene Gesserit are an order of all females. Mother Mohiam arrives on Caladan, and despite Jessica's protests, Paul is subjected to a grueling test to determine if he has the mental fortitude to endure excruciating pain. To the mother's surprise, Paul passes the test, and she is left to wonder if Paul may be the Kwisatz Haderach, the universe's super being that the Bene Gesserit have been attempting to create for centuries. The House Atreides go to Arrakis, and before a mine inspection turned rescue operation, Imperial ecologist Dr. Kynes sees Paul's ability to don the moisture-retaining suit of the world as a sign of his connection to the planet, setting into motion the idea that Paul may be the Messiah to Arrakis' people, the Fremen. Shortly after this event, the Harkonnens attack Arrakis. Duke Leto is captured and brought before Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, having been betrayed by Dr. Yue. Dr. Yue is killed, but not before providing the Duke with a poisoned tooth, which he uses to attempt to assassinate the Baron at the cost of his own life. The Baron survives the attempt and takes over operations on Arrakis. Paul and Jessica are captured and sent to the desert to die. But using the superpower known as the Voice, the duo are able to kill their captors and commandeer their aircraft, landing in the desert. As they prepare to move, Paul begins to have spice-induced delusions, where he begins to see his own future and understand the workings of the planet Arrakis. Paul and Jessica venture into the desert, seeking out the Fremen for aid. After a near-fatal encounter with a Goliath sandworm native to the desert, Paul and Jessica find the Fremen, and after proving themselves worthy, are taken into their ranks. Paul takes the name Muad'Dib and begins training the Fremen in the use of the sonic weirding technology of House Atreides. The Fremen begin an all-out assault on the Harkonnens, targeting their spice production. During this time, Paul is reunited with Gurney Halleck, who survived the attack on House Atreides, and now leads an armed movement against the Harkonnens. Jessica becomes the Reverend Mother of the Fremen, drinking the water of life, a substance that will allow its user great power, causing her to prematurely birth a daughter, Alia, who becomes an incredibly powerful child with all the power and ability of a Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother. Over the course of 2 years, the Empire grows to fear this new alliance. Spice production on Arrakis all but ceases, and fear begins to arise that the leader of the Fremen will drink the water of life. Sensing that the Imperium intend to kill him, Paul decides he must drink the water of life, though the decision nearly proves fatal, as he proceeds to have an intense, feverish experience of the mind. Paul awakens, now with the power to control the sandworms of Arrakis, who he learns are the source of the planet's spice. The Emperor arrives on Arrakis with a massive invasion force, intending to wipe the Fremen from the face of the planet. During a meeting where the Emperor berates Baron Harkonnen, demanding to know why spice production has halted, Alia arrives before the Emperor, warning him that her brother is coming. At that moment, Paul and the Fremen, riding atop sandworms, attack, catching the Sardaukar legions off guard. The Sardaukar troops are quickly decimated, and Baron Harkonnen is killed after being poisoned by Alia and sent out of a breach in the fortress wall into the mouth of a sandworm. Paul meets with the Emperor and his consort, demanding the houses of the Landsraad be sent away from Arrakis. The meeting is interrupted by the presence of Fade Rautha, a Harkonnen who challenges Paul to a duel. Paul accepts, and after a hard-fought battle, Paul defeats Fade Rautha. In the final moments of the movie, Paul, his destiny now fulfilled, and now known to all as the Kwisatz Haderach, speaks, and in doing so, causes it to rain on Arrakis for the first time in ages, bringing an end to the subjugation of its people. While the following statement is liable to piss off anyone who has fond memories of this film, it has to be said. This film doesn't quite do it. Don't get me wrong, it creates an incredible sense of scale, and it has a very unique charm and soul to it that only the feel-good 80s epics seem to have. But given just how much it tries to do, the final product just doesn't quite get where it needs to. The one thing this movie does very well is establishing an absolutely insane sense of scope. Given how many different locations, organizations, and individuals the story needs to cover, it does a pretty good job giving you a sense of not only how large the universe this story inhabits is, but also in creating a sense of importance with every character and group it introduces. Though each element of the story is pretty straightforward, you can't help but feel that sense of wonder you get from the largeness of a story spanning a universe worth of people and places, and watching it all come together in one giant, destiny-fulfilling way. With that in mind, the other big win this movie has to its name is the tone. There are a lot of 80s movies out there that radiate a sense of wonder, and this movie absolutely nails that feel-good feeling. When you watch the actors, you can't help but feel like they're just enjoying themselves. And it really comes through with the spirit of the performances and the smiles you see when things go well for them. The more they lean into the role, the more you get to feel like you're really along for some kind of ride. This is helped along by the soundtrack, which, considering it was done by Toto, you think that would lead to some really weird shit. And while parts of the soundtrack may be a product of their time, it overall does a great job of nailing the emotional highs and lows of this movie, and further builds on that whimsical sense of fun that makes this movie enjoyable. The set design is super eye-catching. While the Atreides' homeworld and the Emperor's throne room and vessels will easily stick in your mind, every single set from the Harkonnens' palace, to the fortress of Arrakeen, to the subterranean network of the Fremen, all hold their own distinctive look and feel to them. And when these sets are combined with the props, whether it be the weapons, the trinkets, the memorabilia, or the costumes, you will have no problem being drawn into every scene and the classic sci-fi air it radiates. The visual work is liable to get a mixed reaction from people. Although elements like the Atreides combat shields are very obviously outdated by today's standards, most of the visual work, especially where the practical effects and the use of extras are concerned, are quite impressive. While the story is undoubtedly good at inspiring a sense of scale and creating the kind of classic wonder that you can't find very often in modern offerings, it's not free from problems. The movie suffers when it comes to its pacing. While the first half to two-thirds of the movie are reasonably set up and well executed, the build-up to and the execution of the climax of the film are a lot weaker than they really ought to be. It feels as though they tried to accomplish the same amount of plot development in the last 30 to 40 minutes of the film as they had in the hour 20 that came before it, and it really shows. While Paul's journey following him joining the Fremen is undoubtedly vital to the story, it doesn't have any room to breathe. The final 30 minutes or so is crammed with the idea of water on Arrakis, the birth of Paul's sister, Paul's war against the Harkonnens, which includes training the Fremen and reuniting with Gurney, Paul's ascension to his role as the Chosen One, Paul's love story with the Fremen Chani, the revelation of where spice on Arrakis comes from, and of course the battle with the Emperor's forces and Paul fulfilling his role as protector of the universe. If that sounds like a lot to throw into the final act of a movie, you would be correct. And it's disappointing because there's a lot of interesting plot threads and information introduced that just don't go anywhere. Due to how crammed the story is, there's naturally a problem with how information is presented. Dialogue, even in the best moments of the movie, tends to be pretty on the nose in service of telling you everything you have to know about the story. While the actors are able to bring enough charm and charisma to compensate, and the script has its moments to flesh out the characters, there's still an abundance of pretty dry material throughout. Another big issue related to the presentation of information is the use of a narrator. It helps that the narrator is actually a character in this movie, and she provides the audience with a pretty concrete connection to the world because of this. But her presence in the movie is weirdly inconsistent. She arrives at the beginning of the movie to exposit us into the world of Dune, telling us who's who and what's where, but she proceeds to disappear for the next hour and a half or so, at which point she intermittently pops in to talk about Paul's exploits with the Fremen and his rise to power. This ends up being pretty jarring and frankly unnecessary, considering she's often describing things that are literally happening right in front of us. This is another one of those classic moments where the movie should have either not had a narrator and focused on visual storytelling, or leaned on the narrator completely to fill in the gaps they could not show. The final thing worth bringing up, for those of you who need to hear it, is that this is a David Lynch movie. What I mean by that is that there will be some moments in the movie, especially related to Paul's dreams and the members of the Spacing Guild, where you see some pretty strange shit. Will it be the most horrifying thing you've ever seen? I doubt it. Will the bizarre nature of these visuals leave you scarred for life? Maybe not. But if you're made uncomfortable by weird-looking things, then just be aware that they're in this movie. Then you can take the edge off the weirdness however you please. The final rating for this campy cosmic crusade is 6.5 out of 10, though it inspires a sense of adventure and wonder, and brings to bear some enthusiastic acting, well-executed set and prop design, and a stylish soundtrack to back it up. The rushed storytelling and overly plain dialogue keeps it from being the amazing adventure it might have been. With that said, though, if you have a soft spot for the goofier and more heartfelt sci-fi adventures from days gone by, this movie is sure to get the nostalgia flowing better than any. That's all we've got for today. Thanks for stopping by. If you feel it's worth the while, consider liking, sharing, or subscribing. And if there's a movie you want to see reviewed, leave your suggestions down in the comments. Also, if you're feeling especially generous, consider following me on Twitter @Untrained for updates and other nonsense. There's plenty more to come, so if you care enough to return for it, then I'll see you when I see you.